I'm Alexandra, 34 years old, sitting in divorce court, watching my husband of 8 years laugh as he signs our divorce papers. James always thought I was just his trophy wife with no ambition. Little did he know that while he was cheating on me with his coworker, I was building an empire right under his nose. The judge is about to read my financial statement, and I can't wait to see his smug smile disappear. Before I tell you how my soon-to-be ex-husband's smile vanished from his face, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when no one expected you to. I was a small-town girl from Indiana who moved to Chicago for college with big dreams. I studied graphic design and was determined to make it in the big city despite my modest upbringing. My parents had always taught me the value of hard work and saving money, lessons that would prove invaluable later in my life. I met James at a charity fundraiser for a children's hospital. I was there because I had volunteered to design their promotional materials, and he was there because, as I later learned, it was good for his image. James came from old money, worked as an investment banker, and exuded the kind of confidence that only comes from never having to worry about finances a day in your life. "You don't look like you belong here," were his first words to me, which I now realize was both an insult and a preview of our entire relationship. At the time, though, his charming smile and the way he focused entirely on me when we talked made me overlook the red flag. Our romance was a whirlwind. James took me to restaurants where the menus had no prices, weekend trips to New York on a whim, and introduced me to a lifestyle I had only seen in movies. He seemed perfect, attentive, successful, and seemingly in love with me despite my ordinary background. I was making a modest income as a junior graphic designer at a marketing firm. I loved my job, the creative challenges, and the satisfaction of seeing my work in the real world. James, however, referred to it as my little job and often suggested I didn't need to work at all. "Why exhaust yourself for pennies when I can give you everything?" he would say, not understanding that my career was about more than money. It was about my identity and independence. The proposal came 6 months after we met, at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Chicago skyline. The ring was enormous, the champagne expensive, and the moment perfectly orchestrated for maximum effect. Several diners even applauded. It felt like a fairy tale, and I said yes without hesitation. Our wedding was small but elegant, my choice. Despite his family's push for a lavish affair with hundreds of guests, looking back, I realized that was one of the few times I stood my ground against the Shannon family expectations. A modest wedding for a modest girl, his mother, Elaine, had commented with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. That was my first real taste of how his family viewed me, as someone who wasn't quite good enough for their son. After the honeymoon in the Maldives, we moved into James' luxury condo in downtown Chicago. Everything was sleek, expensive, and cold, much like his family. I tried to add personal touches, photos, and colorful artwork, but James preferred the minimalist aesthetic that showcased his wealth rather than our personality as a couple. The first signs of trouble appeared within months. James questioned every decorating decision I made, criticized my choice of friends, and made subtle digs about my career path. "Graphic design is so common," he said once after meeting some of my colleagues. "You have the potential to be exceptional, but you're squandering it on logo designs for companies no one has heard of." I tried to fit into a social circle, the wives of other investment bankers and executives who spent their days shopping, at spas, or planning charity events. They were pleasant enough to my face, but never truly accepted me. I overheard one of them at a dinner party referring to me as James' experiment with the middle class. Instead of defending me, James later suggested that I try harder to fit in. Maybe update my wardrobe or take up tennis. "They just need to see that you're making an effort to adapt to our lifestyle," he explained, as if my identity was something to be molded and corrected. Those early years were a confusing mix of luxury and loneliness, of being showered with expensive gifts while feeling my self-worth diminish. I was slowly becoming what James wanted, a trophy wife who reflected well on him, while the independent, creative woman I had been was fading away. 2 years into our marriage, the tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface began to boil over. James had always been particular about our finances, but his behavior became increasingly controlling. Despite our joint accounts, he questioned every purchase I made while spending lavishly on himself without discussion. "Did you really need another art supply set?" he would ask, examining the credit card statement. "That's $200 that could have been invested." Meanwhile, he thought nothing of dropping thousands on a new watch or golf clubs. Gradually, I found myself isolated from my friends and family. Visits to my parents in Indiana became less frequent because James always had an excuse: a work event, a dinner with clients, or simply that Winfield was too provincial for his tastes. My college friends stopped calling after James made it clear they weren't sophisticated enough for his home. Your friend Heather asked if our wine was from Napa. He scoffed after a dinner party I had organized. As if we would serve domestic wine. "It's embarrassing, Alexandra." My career, which had once been a source of pride, became a constant battleground. When I was offered a promotion to senior designer, James wasn't supportive. "Is the modest bump in salary worth the extra hours away from home?" he questioned. "We're trying to start a family soon, remember?" This was news to me. Whenever I brought up having children, he always said the timing wasn't right. It was around this time that I discovered my passion for digital marketing. The agency I worked for was expanding its services, and I volunteered to learn the analytics and strategy aspects. I found I had a knack for understanding consumer behavior and creating targeted campaigns that delivered results. Excited about this new direction, I shared my idea of eventually starting my own boutique digital marketing firm with James. His response was crushing. "Alexandra, be realistic. Starting a business requires business acumen, which isn't exactly your strong suit. Besides, most small businesses fail within the first year." Our approaches to money highlighted our fundamental differences. James believed in conspicuous consumption: the right address, the right car, the right vacation spots, all to maintain an image of success. I, with my middle-class upbringing, believed in saving, investing wisely, and finding value rather than just high price tags. As our third anniversary approached, James' late nights at work became the norm rather than the exception. Big client, market volatility, quarterly reports. His excuses varied, but his absence remained constant. I ate dinner alone most nights, went to bed alone, and increasingly lived the life of someone single, but with the financial scrutiny of a child receiving an allowance. Our first truly major argument came after his family's annual Christmas gathering. In the car ride home, his mother had pointedly asked when we would be giving her grandchildren. I mentioned that I was ready whenever James was, only to have him smoothly change the subject. When I confronted him at home, his reaction was cold. "Children are a massive responsibility and expense," he said, loosening his tie. "With your modest career and my family's expectations. Any child of ours would need trust funds, private schooling, the right connections. We're not there yet financially." "Not there yet?" I questioned, genuinely confused. "James, you make 7 figures. Your family has generational wealth. What are we waiting for?" His response was telling. "My money isn't the issue. You still haven't established yourself properly. What would you contribute to a child's future?" The hurt of his words festered as days turned into weeks. His dismissive attitude toward my career, insignificant. He called my salary during another argument, solidified something in me. I needed financial independence, not just for myself, but for my sanity. That week, I opened a separate bank account at a different bank. I set up a small direct deposit from my paycheck. Not enough that James would notice if he checked our joint accounts, but enough to start building something of my own. Simultaneously, I began educating myself on financial independence. I read books on investing, took free online courses on business management, and subscribed to newsletters about entrepreneurship. All of this I did in private browsing modes, careful not to leave digital breadcrumbs for James to discover. The woman who had once been swept off her feet by grand gestures and expensive dinners was slowly awakening to the gilded cage she lived in and planning her escape, one small step at a time. While James continued his late nights at work, I began laying the foundation for my independence. Using my growing separate savings, I registered a small business entity, Alexander Grant Digital Solutions, and built a simple but professional website showcasing my portfolio and services. My first challenge was finding time to work on my business without James knowing. I converted our rarely used guest bedroom into a home office, explaining to James that I needed a dedicated space for freelance projects to supplement our income. He barely paid attention to the change, dismissing my freelance work as a hobby rather than a serious endeavor. "Just don't let it interfere with our social obligations," was his only concern. My first client came through a stroke of luck at our local coffee shop. I overheard Sofia Alvarez, the owner of a struggling but beloved bakery, complaining about the cost quotes she'd received from marketing agencies. "I can't afford $5,000 for a campaign, but I'm losing ground to the chain bakeries," she told the barista. I introduced myself, explained my background, and offered to help her at a fraction of the cost, with the understanding that I was building my portfolio. Sophia took a chance on me, and the results exceeded both our expectations. Her social media engagement increased by 300%, and a targeted email campaign brought in new corporate catering clients. The before and after was dramatic enough that she referred me to other small business owners in her network. Working with Sophia not only gave me my first success story, but also a genuine friendship, something I had been missing in James' curated social circle. She was authentic, hardworking, and appreciated my skills in a way my husband never had. "You have a gift, Alex," she told me over coffee one day. "You understand what makes businesses special and how to communicate that to customers." I worked late nights while James was away on his increasingly frequent business trips. I converted our walk-in closet into a makeshift recording studio for client calls, using my old college blankets to dampen the sound. Every new client was both exhilarating and terrifying. Exhilarating because my business was growing, terrifying because discovery would mean confrontation. The learning curve was steep. I made mistakes, undercharging for complex projects, occasionally overpromising on timelines, but I learned quickly. Each client taught me something new about running a business, about setting boundaries, about valuing my own work. I used my savings to invest in essential equipment and software, carefully hiding the charges among household expenses or making cash purchases. My client list grew steadily over the course of a year, primarily through referrals and word of mouth. Rather than spending the profits, I reinvested most of them back into the business and began setting aside a portion for future investments. James remained oblivious, attributing my increasing confidence to finally adjusting to our lifestyle rather than professional fulfillment. A pivotal moment came when I worked with a local jewelry designer whose sales increased so dramatically after my marketing campaign that her story was featured in a small business magazine. I had to decline being mentioned by name, citing privacy reasons, but the success gave me credibility with larger clients. Through Sophia, I met Natalie Kim, a tech entrepreneur who had sold her first startup for 8 figures and was launching a new venture. Initially hiring me for a small project, Natalie quickly became both a valued client and mentor. "You're charging too little for your expertise," she told me bluntly after reviewing my rate sheet. "Triple your prices and watch how your perceived value changes." She was right. When I raised my rates, instead of losing clients, I attracted more established businesses willing to pay for quality. Natalie also introduced me to the world of investing beyond savings accounts. "Cash loses value sitting still," she explained. "You need to make your money work for you." Under her guidance, I began making strategic investments in emerging tech companies, including Natalie's new venture, which focused on AI solutions for small businesses. I started with small amounts, but as my business grew, so did my investment portfolio. The exhilaration of watching both my business and investments grow was intoxicating. For the first time since meeting James, I felt truly alive, purposeful, and independent. I was building something valuable entirely on my own merits. Throughout this period, I maintained the appearance of being just James' wife at social functions. I nodded politely when his colleagues' wives discussed their shopping trips and charity committees. I attended his work dinners and played the supportive spouse role flawlessly, all while running a growing business from our home and making investment decisions that would alter the course of my life. My double life was exhausting but empowering. Each new client, each successful campaign, Each investment return was a step toward the freedom I increasingly realized I needed from my controlling marriage. 5 years into our marriage, the facade began to crumble. It started with a text message that appeared on James' phone while he was in the shower, a preview visible on his lock screen from someone named V that read, "Miss you already." Last night was. The message disappeared before I could read more, but it planted a seed of suspicion that I couldn't ignore. James had been more distant than usual, often coming home smelling of unfamiliar perfume that he claimed was from hugging clients goodbye. Rather than confronting him immediately, I decided to investigate. I noted his patterns: the late Thursday meetings that always ran until after 9, the weekend conferences that never had websites I could find, the sudden increase in client dinners at a specific upscale restaurant. The following Thursday, I told James the first was visiting Sophia to help with a special event at her bakery. Instead, I parked my car near the restaurant he frequented and waited. At 8:30, his BMW pulled into the parking lot. 10 minutes later, a silver Audi arrived and a woman with long dark hair stepped out. Even from a distance, I recognized Vanessa Pierce, his colleague from the investment firm. I watched them embrace in a way colleagues never would. Saw him kiss her in the parking lot before they entered the restaurant together. My hands shook as I took photos with my phone, my stomach a hollow pit of betrayal and confirmation. I gave them 30 minutes before I walked into the restaurant. They were at a corner table, his hand on hers, leaning in intimately. I approached silently, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. "This explains the late meetings," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. James jerked back, his face cycling through shock, guilt, and finally settling on annoyance at being caught. Vanessa had the decency to look embarrassed, gathering her purse and mumbling something about using the restroom. "Alexandra, this isn't what it looks like," James began, using the same smooth tone he employed with difficult clients. "Really? Because it looks like you're having dinner with your girlfriend while your wife thinks you're working." The conversation that followed was surreal. James offered a half-hearted apology, claimed it was just physical, and had the audacity to blame me for his infidelity. "You've been so wrapped up in your little freelance projects," he said, lowering his voice as neighboring diners began to notice our attention. "You've become boring, Alexandra. Unambitious. When was the last time you made an effort in our marriage?" I left the restaurant alone, driving aimlessly for hours before returning home. James came back past midnight, offering promises to end the affair, suggesting counseling, even proposing a second honeymoon. For reasons I didn't fully understand then, I pretended to consider reconciliation. "I need time," I told him, which wasn't a lie. I needed time, not to forgive him, but to plan my next steps. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in deception on both our parts. James became temporarily attentive, bringing flowers, suggesting date nights, while I began consulting with divorce attorneys during my meetings with clients. Teresa Washington, a formidable divorce attorney recommended by Natalie, laid out the reality of my situation. "Illinois is an equitable distribution state," she explained. "Without a prenuptial agreement, the court will divide marital assets based on what they deem fair, not necessarily equal." I learned about our financial entanglements, the complexity of divorcing someone with family money, and the importance of documenting everything. Teresa advised me to gather information about all our assets, accounts, and investments before making any moves. "Knowledge is power, especially in divorce," she said. My cautious information gathering came to an abrupt halt when James discovered my browser history on our shared computer. I had forgotten to use private browsing for one search: divorce financial discovery process. His rage was immediate and frightening. He cornered me in our kitchen, waving his phone with the screenshot he'd taken. "Is this what you've been doing? Planning to divorce me and take my money?" His face was red, a vein pulsing in his forehead. "Let me make this clear, Alexandra. You'll have nothing without me. Nothing. My family's lawyers will make sure of it." I remained calm, which only infuriated him more. "I'm not planning anything, James. I was just researching after what happened. Wouldn't you do the same?" He seemed mollified by my explanation, but the threat lingered between us. That night, I moved all my important business documents to a secure cloud storage and began transferring digital records to drives I kept in a safety deposit box James knew nothing about. The final discovery came 3 weeks later. While organizing our closet, a task James never participated in, I found a jewelry box tucked inside his winter boots. Inside was a receipt for a diamond bracelet from Tiffany's dated 2 months prior. I had never received such a gift. Even knowing about the affair, this evidence of his tangible investment in another woman stung in a way I hadn't expected. The receipt showed he had spent nearly $15,000, money that was supposedly our money, on Vanessa. Before I could process this new betrayal, I heard the front door open. Voices, James and a woman, laughed in our entryway. I remained frozen in our closet as they entered our bedroom, clearly not expecting me home in the middle of the day. I stepped out to find James and Vanessa embracing at the foot of our bed, the bed we had shared for 5 years. "Alexandra," James exclaimed, not bothering to step away from Vanessa. "You're supposed to be at work." "I took a half day," I replied, surprised by my own composure. Clearly, I should have called first. What followed was not the emotional confrontation movies had prepared me for. Instead, James became coldly pragmatic. "Well, this saves me having to have a difficult conversation," he said, straightening his tie. "I want a divorce, Alexandra. Vanessa and I are planning a future together." His confidence was absolute as he outlined his terms. He would generously allow me to keep my personal items and a small settlement that would help me get back on my feet. The condo, our investments, even the art we had collected together, would remain his. "My lawyers will be in touch," he concluded, seemingly confused by my lack of hysteria or pleading. "You should find somewhere else to stay starting tonight." "Actually," I said, "as this is still legally my residence too, I'll be staying. You and Vanessa are welcome to find a hotel." His face darkened at my defiance, but Vanessa tugged at his arm. "Let's go, James. We can deal with this later." As they left, James turned back with one parting shot. "You'll regret not taking my generous offer. By the time my lawyers are done, you'll be lucky to afford a studio apartment in the worst part of town." I closed the door behind them, leaned against it, and for the first time since discovering his affair, I smiled. James had no idea what was coming. The day after I caught James and Vanessa in our bedroom, he moved most of his clothes and personal items out of the condo. I changed the locks that same afternoon, legally questionable, but it gave me time to properly document our belongings before he could remove anything valuable. James' assumption about my financial naivete quickly became apparent in the initial settlement offer his lawyer sent over, a one-time payment of $75,000 and 6 months of living expenses. In exchange, I would make no claims on any of our other assets, including the condo I had helped furnish and decorate over 5 years. "He's testing the waters," Teresa explained when I showed her the offer. "He's assuming you don't know your rights or the true extent of your marital assets." With Teresa's guidance, I formally rejected the offer and began the process of financial discovery, a legal mechanism requiring both parties to disclose all assets and liabilities. James' response was to have his lawyer delay and obfuscate at every turn. "This is a standard tactic," Teresa assured me. "They're hoping to drain your resources and patience until you accept less than you deserve." What James didn't realize was that I wasn't depending on his disclosures. I had been tracking our joint finances meticulously for years, including accounts he thought I didn't know about. More importantly, I had my own growing resources that he knew nothing about. After careful consideration and consultation with Teresa, we made a strategic decision. I would temporarily hide the true value of my business and investments during the initial phases of negotiation. Illinois law generally considered businesses started during marriage to be marital property, but Teresa identified a potential exception based on the fact that James had actively discouraged my business and provided no support, financial or otherwise, in its creation. "We'll disclose everything at the right time," she assured me. "But for now, let's let him believe his own narrative about you." While the legal process inched forward, James launched a social offensive. Mutual friends began avoiding my calls. Invitations to social events dried up. Even the doorman at our building, who had always been friendly, became coldly professional. I later learned that James had been spreading a narrative that I had cheated on him, that I was mentally unstable, and that he was divorcing me despite his best efforts to save our marriage. In the circles where his family name carried weight, his version of events was accepted without question. The pain of the social exile was unexpectedly sharp. People I had broken bread with, celebrated holidays with, shared confidences with, all vanished from my life based on James's lies. All except Sophia and Natalie, who never wavered in their support. People who believe gossip without hearing both sides aren't worth your energy, Sophia told me over emergency cupcakes in her bakery kitchen after a particularly difficult day. Focus on building your new life, not mourning the old one. James' attempts to intimidate me escalated as he realized I wasn't going to quietly accept his terms. There were late-night phone calls, thinly veiled threats about making sure you never work in the city again, and even a suggestion that he would report my business for tax irregularities, an empty threat since my business finances were meticulously documented. His family joined the pressure campaign. His mother, Elaine, called to reason with me. "We always knew you weren't right for James," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But we accepted you because he chose you. Don't make this difficult, Alexandra. Take what's being offered and move on with dignity." I maintained my composure through it all, a skill I had perfected during years of enduring subtle put-downs at Shannon family gatherings. "Thank you for your concern, Elaine. I'll be guided by my attorney's advice." James' overconfidence began working against him. Believing I had no resources to fight a prolonged legal battle, he made several critical mistakes. He failed to disclose accounts in the Cayman Islands that I had documentation for. He underreported the value of his investment portfolio. He claimed certain family heirlooms were separate property when they had been clearly gifted to us as a couple. Teresa documented each discrepancy meticulously, building a case that would eventually undermine his credibility with the court. Meanwhile, my company experienced exponential growth during the separation period. A marketing campaign I designed for a regional restaurant chain went viral, leading to features in industry publications. I had to decline interviews, citing personal reasons, but the professional recognition brought in a flood of new clients. The major breakthrough came when I secured a contract with a national retail chain to overhaul their digital marketing strategy, a six-figure deal that transformed my business from successful to exceptional. I hired 3 employees, rented a small office space, and began turning down clients whose values didn't align with my company's mission. All of this happened as James and his legal team continued to characterize me as a struggling freelancer dependent on his support. His perception of me as the naive small-town girl dazzled by his wealth had calcified to the point where he couldn't conceive of my success independent of him. The night before our final court date, I sat alone in the condo that had never felt like home, reflecting on my journey. 5 years earlier, I had been so eager to please James that I had begun to lose myself. His betrayal, painful as it was, had forced me to rediscover my strength, ambition, and worth. I packed a small overnight bag. Regardless of the judge's decision, I had decided I would not spend another night in the space where my marriage had unraveled. My new penthouse apartment was ready, purchased through an LLC James knew nothing about, furnished with pieces I had chosen for their beauty and comfort rather than their status value. As I zipped the bag closed, my phone chimed with a text from Natalie. "Remember who you are tomorrow, not who he tried to make you be." With those words in my heart, I prepared to face the final act of my marriage to James Shannon. The morning of our court date dawned clear and crisp. I dressed in a navy blue suit, conservative but confident, with a single piece of jewelry, a small diamond pendant Sophia and Natalie had given me to mark my business's first anniversary. My Independence Diamond, they had called it. I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, as Teresa had advised. James was already there, looking expensive in a tailored charcoal suit, his attorney Lawrence Wilson beside him. Lawrence was a senior partner at one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms and had a reputation for aggressive divorce settlements that favored wealthy clients. James smirked when he saw me, leaning over to whisper something to Lawrence that made both men chuckle. His confidence was palpable. He believed this was merely a formality before his inevitable victory. Teresa arrived moments later, immaculate in a crimson suit that stood out against the courthouse's muted colors. Unlike Lawrence with his team of junior associates, Teresa worked alone but radiated a quiet confidence that had reassured me from our first meeting. "Ready?" she asked, her expression giving nothing away to observing eyes. "More than ready," I replied. Judge Margaret Thompson's courtroom was intimidating in its austerity. The judge herself, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes, had a reputation for fairness but little patience for games or emotional displays. As proceedings began, James put on a performance worthy of an Oscar. His testimony painted him as the devoted husband who had supported his wife's modest career ambitions, only to be repaid with ingratitude and unreasonable demands in the divorce. "I just want a fair resolution, Your Honor," he said, his voice modulated to convey reasonable disappointment. "I've offered Mrs. Shannon a generous settlement that would allow her to maintain a comfortable lifestyle while she rebuilds her career." Lawrence presented their case for the division of assets, highlighting James's family wealth as separate property, minimizing my contributions to our marital assets, and suggesting that the condo, purchased primarily with his earnings, should remain his property. Throughout their presentation, I maintained my composure, neither reacting to James's fabrications nor revealing my emotions. Judge Thompson occasionally glanced my way, her expression unreadable. When it came time to sign the initial divorce decree, separating our marital status while financial matters were finalized, James made a show of it. He signed with a flourish, a laugh escaping his lips as he kept his Mont Blanc pen. As he returned to his seat, he passed close enough to whisper, "Enjoy going back to your parents' basement." Teresa's presentation began methodically, her approach a stark contrast to Lawrence's theatrical arguments. She presented evidence of James' financial deceptions during our marriage, the hidden accounts, the lavish spending on Vanessa, the pattern of financial control. "Your Honor," Teresa said, "Mr. Shannon has not been forthcoming about the full extent of marital assets as required by Illinois law." She submitted documentation of accounts James had failed to disclose, including dates, account numbers, and approximate balances. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Teresa continued, his smug expression giving way to nervous glances at Lawrence. His attorney requested a brief recess, which Judge Thompson denied. "I believe we should continue, Counselor. I'm particularly interested in hearing about these undisclosed assets." The atmosphere in the courtroom tensed as Teresa methodically dismantled James' financial deceptions. Judge Thompson's expression grew increasingly stern as the evidence mounted. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Teresa continued, "we request that the court consider Mrs. Shannon's separate property that was established during the marriage, but without any contribution or support from Mr. Shannon." This was the moment we had prepared for. Judge Thompson looked up from her notes. "Please elaborate, Counselor." "Mrs. Shannon established a digital marketing business during the marriage. Mr. Shannon not only provided no support for this venture, but actively discouraged it and belittled her professional ambitions, as evidenced by these communications." Teresa presented emails and text messages where James had dismissed my business as a hobby and discouraged my entrepreneurial goals. Judge Thompson reviewed the documents carefully before addressing me directly for the first time. "Mrs. Shannon, the court requires full financial disclosure from both parties. Have you submitted complete information about this business venture?" "Not yet, Your Honor," I replied as we had planned. "My complete financial statement is ready for submission today." Teresa handed the court clerk a sealed envelope containing my complete financial disclosure, the document we had strategically held back until this moment. "I request that the court review Mrs. Shannon's financial statement before making any determinations about asset division," Teresa said. Judge Thompson nodded and opened the envelope. The courtroom fell silent as she read, her eyebrows rising slightly, the only indication of surprise from the otherwise composed judge. After what felt like eternity, Judge Thompson looked up. "For the record, I will read the summary of Mrs. Shannon's assets." My heart pounded as she began to read. "Alexandra Grant Digital Solutions, a digital marketing firm established 3 years ago. Current valuation based on revenue and contracts for $1,200,000. James had snapped up, his expression of disbelief almost comical. Investment portfolio, including technology stocks and startup investments, $1,800,000. James gripped the table, his knuckles white. Real estate holdings, one property purchased 3 months ago, valued at $950,000. By now, James looked physically ill, his face drained of color, his body rigid with shock. Beside him, Lawrence was frantically whispering, but James seemed unable to process what he was hearing. Total assets, $6,950,000, Judge Thompson concluded. The courtroom remained silent. James stared at me as if seeing a stranger. In that moment, I felt no triumph, no vindication, just a profound relief that the truth was finally on record. Judge Thompson broke the silence. Mr. Shannon, do you wish to revise any of your previous statements regarding Mrs. Shannon's financial dependence on you? James seemed incapable of speech. Lawrence stood quickly. Your Honor, we were unaware of these assets. We contend that as they were acquired during the marriage, Mr. Shannon is entitled to an equitable portion. Teresa was prepared for this argument. Your Honor, we direct the court's attention to paragraph 23 of the Shannon prenuptial agreement, which both parties signed prior to marriage. This was our ace. When reviewing our prenup years after signing, Teresa had discovered a clause James' own lawyers had included: any business created by either spouse during the marriage without capital investment from the other spouse would remain separate property in the event of divorce. The clause was likely included to protect Mr. Shannon's potential ventures, Teresa explained. However, the language applies equally to Mrs. Shannon's business, which she built without any financial contribution from Mr. Shannon. Judge Thompson reviewed the prenuptial agreement, nodding slowly. The language is indeed clear. Miss Washington, please continue. Teresa outlined how I had built my business from scratch using my own savings and reinvesting profits, all while James actively discouraged my efforts. She presented statements from clients and my mentor, Natalie, attesting to my independent work and business acumen. Throughout Teresa's presentation, I watched James, the man who had laughed while signing our divorce papers just an hour earlier, now sat frozen, his confident demeanor shattered. Vanessa, who had been sitting in the gallery, slipped out of the courtroom, her expression unreadable. Judge Thompson took 30 minutes to review all documents before delivering her ruling. When she returned, her decision was clear. Based on the evidence presented and the terms of the prenuptial agreement, the court finds that Alexandra Grant Digital Solutions and the resulting investment portfolio constitute separate property belonging solely to Mrs. Shannon. James made a strangled sound, somewhere between a gasp and a protest. Furthermore, Judge Thompson continued, given Mr. Shannon's failure to fully disclose marital assets as required by law, the court is inclined to view the division of remaining marital assets in a light more favorable to Mrs. Shannon. The rest of her ruling was a blur of legal terms, but the outcome was clear. I would keep my business, my investments, and my new property. Additionally, I would receive a greater portion of our marital assets due to James' deception. The luxury condo would be sold, with proceeds divided according to the judge's formula. As we stood to leave, James approached me, his lawyer trying unsuccessfully to hold him back. You planned this, he hissed, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. All these years, you were just waiting to take me down. I looked at the man I had once loved, now a stranger consumed by his own narrative of victimhood.
No, James.
I built something while you were busy destroying what we had. That's the difference between us. Teresa gently guided me away, leaving James standing alone in the emptying courtroom, the remnants of his superiority complex lying in shambles around him. Walking out of the courthouse, the day felt less like a victory and more like liberation. The weight of deception, both James's and my own necessary secrecy, lifted from my shoulders with each step down those marble stairs. James attempted to intercept me outside, his earlier rage now replaced with an unsettling charm. Alexandra, we should talk privately. I think I may have underestimated you. Perhaps we were hasty in ending things. I almost laughed at the transparency of his sudden interest in reconciliation. Now that he knew my net worth, I was once again worthy of his attention. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. There's nothing to discuss, James. The court has made its decision. His smile faltered. You know I still care about you. We built a life together. All this business success you've had, we could combine forces. Think about the power couple we could be. Teresa stepped between us. Mr. Shannon, all communication should go through counsel from this point forward. That evening, I met Sophia, Natalie, and Teresa for dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. We ordered champagne, not to celebrate the defeat of James, but to toast new beginnings. To Alexandra, Natalie raised her glass, who built an empire while a fool was looking the other way. Within a week, I moved into my new penthouse, a space I had chosen for its wall of windows overlooking the lake and the open floor plan perfect for both living and occasionally working. Unlike the sterile luxury of the condo I had shared with James, this space radiated warmth and personality from the first day. With the divorce finalized, I could finally be public about my business. I expanded from my small office to a full floor in a downtown building, hiring a team of talented marketers who shared my vision for helping businesses authentically connect with their customers. The company grew beyond my initial dreams. By the end of the first year post-divorce, we had clients across the country and were looking at international expansion. I named Sophia our Chief Operating Officer, her organizational skills and people management abilities complementing my creative and strategic focus. One of the most healing experiences was reconnecting with my family. James had subtly isolated me from them, making visits home difficult and often criticizing them afterward. For the first time in years, I spent holidays in Indiana, laughing in my parents' kitchen, playing with my nieces and nephews, remembering the grounded values that had shaped me. We always knew you were extraordinary, my mother said during one visit. We just worried you had forgotten. Despite the professional success, the emotional aftermath of the divorce wasn't always easy to navigate. There were nights I woke up angry at the years I'd spent diminishing myself to fit James' expectations. There were moments I questioned my judgment, wondering how I had missed the red flags. Recognizing I needed help processing these feelings, I started working with a therapist specializing in recovery from manipulative relationships. Dr. Harper helped me understand the gradual nature of emotional manipulation and how even strong, intelligent people can be vulnerable. Healing isn't linear, she reminded me often. Some days you'll feel empowered by what you've overcome. Other days, you'll still feel the hurt. Both reactions are valid. 6 months after the divorce, I used a portion of my resources to establish the Financial Literacy Foundation for Women, focusing on helping women achieve economic independence, particularly those coming out of controlling or abusive relationships. We offered grants, mentorship, and practical education about money management and entrepreneurship. The foundation became a platform for speaking at women's business conferences about financial literacy and independence. Standing at podiums across the country, sharing my story and the lessons learned, I found purpose in transforming my painful experience into guidance for others. Financial independence isn't just about money, became my message. It's about having the freedom to make choices based on your values rather than necessity or fear. Almost exactly a year after our divorce was finalized, I encountered James at a charity gala I was attending with Natalie. He looked older, less polished than I remembered. He approached cautiously, his new date, not Vanessa, hovering uncertainly nearby. You look well, Alexandra, he said, his tone lacking the confidence that once defined him. I hear your company is doing remarkable things. It is, I replied simply. I never really saw it, your potential, he admitted after an awkward pause. I was so focused on molding you into what I thought a wife should be that I missed who you actually were. I studied the man I had once built my life around, feeling neither hate nor love, just a distant compassion for someone who measured worth in such limited ways. I hope you find what you're looking for, James, I said sincerely before rejoining Natalie and the others at our table. Later that night, in the quiet of my home, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. What it seemed like the ultimate rejection, James's affair and cruel dismissal, had become the catalyst for my liberation. His attempt to discard me had forced me to rediscover my own value. I began dating again, eventually approaching relationships with healthier boundaries and a clearer sense of my non-negotiables. I no longer felt the need to contort myself to fit someone else's expectations. The right person would appreciate me for exactly who I was, accomplishments and flaws alike. My life now isn't perfect. No life ever is. But it's authentically mine. Every decision, from the clients I accept to the art on my walls, reflects my values rather than someone else's expectations. The net worth that shocked James in that courtroom continues to grow. But more importantly, so does my sense of purpose and peace. If you're watching this and facing your own crossroads of rejection or underestimation, remember that sometimes what seems like an ending is actually a beginning in disguise. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see it. Have you ever had someone underestimate you, only to prove them wrong? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that their value isn't defined by anyone else's perception. Thank you for listening to my journey.